Welcome, folks. Happy to see you joining us today. Awesome. I see some familiar names, some folks that were with us last week, which is good. But don't worry if you weren't here last week. I'll try to catch you up a little bit when we get started here. So we are recording this presentation so that it will be available later on. I'll probably package it as a series and post it to our YouTube channel. If you are interested, at the end of the presentation today, I will be posting a link to register for next week's class. And then I will also go ahead and put the link to our YouTube channel so that you can access some of our other videos that we have from some of our previous classes that we've taught. And this webinar has been set up as an on-demand webinar, which means that if you have registered for it, you should have the ability to, once the webinar concludes, to follow the link that you used when you registered. And it will allow you to view the video as well. So there's a few different options for you to view this webinar after it concludes. I don't anticipate us taking the entire hour today, but that'll give us ample time for questions at the end. And we'll get started in about 4 minutes or so. I want to give people a chance to get logged in here. Let's see. So you do have the ability to chat to me in the chat box. So I'm going to ask you all a question while we're waiting to get started here, just to kind of get a feel for our audience right now. How many folks are from Florida? If you are from Florida, go ahead and type that in the chat box. And if you're not from Florida, if you would go ahead and tell us either where you live now or where you used to live before you moved here to Florida. Go ahead and just type it right into the chat box. All right. So far we got 50-50. Awesome. Some people that have been in Florida for a long time. One person lived in Florida their whole life. We've got, awesome, 2 people from Florida. Great. Okay. Actually have some folks from out west, which is nice. Usually we hear more from folks who are coming to us from the Midwest and the Northeast, but we actually have someone from California and somebody who lived in Colorado. So that's great. Full-time Floridian for 4 years. 4 years isn't quite long enough, I don't think, to earn the Floridian title there. All right, we've got just a couple more minutes before we're going to get started. If you're just joining us, we're just typing into the chat box, you know, if you're from Florida or if you're not from Florida, where you are from, if you're just joining us. And I will reiterate as well that this webinar is being recorded, so it will be available after the fact. Okay, great. In Charlotte County for 2 years. Okay. Charlotte County is nice. I like Charlotte County. Some really nice mangroves down in Charlotte County. All right, we've got just a few more minutes here. Let's see here, Hillsborough County, all right. I spent some time in Hillsborough County, lived there for a while. Some good food in Hillsborough County. Probably the best Cuban food in our area. You might be able to find better Cuban food in Miami, but otherwise Tampa's the place to go. All right, just about 2 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. I just want to give everybody a chance. We had about 40 folks registered for today, so I want to make sure that they all have a chance to log in before we get started. All right, so it looks like we are, oh, from Pinellas. The recording is available. It hasn't been processed and put up on YouTube yet, but I can, when we finish up the webinar today, I'll go ahead and I'll put that link in here too. So it'll just be the Zoom recording that you would get in the link here, as well as the link to sign up for next week and the link to our YouTube channel. So thank you for that nice compliment as well, Susan. I appreciate that. All right. Well, it is 12 o'clock on the nose. So we'll go ahead and get started. And as folks kind of join us, we will catch them up if we need to. But again, I just want to thank you for joining me today to talk about establishment and maintenance of your trees once they've been put in the ground. So again, this is part 2 of our 3-part webinar series on community tree care. And my name is Alyssa Vinson. I'm the residential horticulture agent here in Manatee County, Florida. Our office is located at the county fairgrounds in Palmetto. And I am really excited to talk to you about trees. Trees are a big passion of mine. And I really think it's important for us to understand that the more we care for our community trees and the trees in our urban canopy, the better our environment will be and the better our health will be as well. There are a lot of benefits to having healthy trees in the areas where we live. And so with that, I do want to take the opportunity, as I do at the beginning of all of my presentations, just to give you a quick overview if you're new to Extension, to talk about who we are. We are a cooperative service that's offered through the land grant university system. So we are a function of a partnership between Manatee County government and the University of Florida. And our mission at EPIPHYTES, which is the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, is to both conduct research that is applicable and relevant and to make that research accessible to the people in our communities, with the end goal being to sustain and enhance the quality of human life. So that's who we are, that's our goal. And within Manatee County, we have some pretty great impacts that I like to highlight. I'm not going to read them all directly for you because I'm sure you can read, but you can see that we have millions of gallons of water saved. This is mainly through landscape retrofitting and changing behaviors as far as irrigation in our landscapes. We provide millions of dollars in value to new licenses and to CEUs for pesticide license holders. We reach 28,000 youth through the 4-H youth development program and other youth programs. And then, the program that's really near and dear to my heart, I have the joy of managing our Master Gardener volunteer program. And this is a group of, on average about 100 people that donate 10,000 hours or more of their time every year to the community. And they do this in a variety of different ways, but they really do spend a lot of time out there educating the community on horticultural practices. So I know some of you in the audience are Master Gardener volunteers, and I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you do. We couldn't do what we do as Extension without Master Gardeners. So with that, we're going to jump into our topic of today. And we're talking about establishing and maintaining our trees once we've got them kind of put in the ground. Last week, we talked a lot about tree selection, finding the appropriate tree for your location, identifying certain site characteristics that may hinder your tree planting process. And then we talked about actually planting your tree and what things you need to look for in order to properly plant your tree. And so if you missed last week, I will put a link to the recording here in the chat at the end of the webinar, but they will also be available as a packaged video series on our YouTube channel when we conclude after next week. And so, some of those things that we talked about with selection and site characteristics, when we talk about establishment and maintenance, some of those factors play into how well a tree will be established or whether or not it will require a lot of long-term maintenance. And so, when you're looking at your trees that you want to put in the ground, one of the good things to do is to figure out, okay, are these trees susceptible to wind damage, right? That's one of the things that we talked about. Are they susceptible to any particular pests that might be a problem right now? Think about certain diseases that are going around, things like Ganoderma, lethal bronzing disease. It might not be the, prime time to be putting in a whole slew of really expensive palms. So recognizing that some of those tree characteristics play into establishment and maintenance is important. But okay, you got your perfect tree. You looked up, you made sure there weren't any wires overhead. You checked your soil for compaction. You have done a pH test. You know that this tree is like the perfect tree for this spot. You dug your hole the appropriate size. You made sure you left 1 to 2 inches of that root ball above the surrounding soil surface. You got it in the ground. Now what do you do with the tree, right? In most cases, when you're buying a larger nursery grown tree, you're going to spend a pretty good amount of money on that tree. So you really want to make sure that that tree is going to survive. And the very first thing that you're going to be concerned about is how much water and how frequently do I need to water? And so the recommendations that come from the University of Florida, and this is through a lot of research done with Ed Gilman and the folks through the hurricane recovery and urban forestry programs, they looked at, okay, let's think about a tree that is growing really vigorously and has a lot of, good, healthy growth really quickly. So you have an irrigation schedule for vigor. And then you have an irrigation schedule for survival. Okay, this is the bare minimum. Maybe I don't have a lot of resources to put into this tree, but I really want this tree to survive. What do I have to do in order to keep it alive? So the general recommendation for water is going to be that you apply 2 gallons of water per inch of trunk caliper at each watering event. So if you had a 2-inch trunk caliper tree, you would need to water at every watering 4 gallons, okay? And so this is based on, information related to how water moves through our soil, how roots are using water. I have a question for you all, and go ahead and type it in the chat box, the answer here. So should I water out at the drip line or directly on top of the root ball? What do we think? Go ahead and type it into the chat box. Out at the drip line or directly on top of the root ball? Okay. 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 All right. Okay, good. So some folks are writing both. Some people said it depends on what type of root growth the tree has. Some people are saying that until the tree is established, you should focus on the root ball, and then after it's established, you can water just out at the drip line. I would say ideally what you're going to want to do is you want to water on that root ball, but you also want to make sure that you're keeping the surrounding soil moist as well. So you're going to need to expand out a little bit past the drip line when you're doing your watering. And this is mainly because particularly in our developed communities, if you have planted a tree and you're not ensuring that the moisture extends into the surrounding soil, it's going to be harder for those roots to go out into that very dry soil, right? So if you have this root ball that you're keeping really moist and happy, but then the surrounding soil is really dry, potentially it's a little bit, more compacted than the soil immediately next to the root ball, you may end up with some issues with the roots not wanting to out into that really dry soil. So ideally, you're going to make sure that that whole area out past the drip line is getting moist. So when you look at this table here, so again, let's say that you have, a 2-inch caliper tree that you've put in the ground. You're going to want to water it 4 gallons, okay, every time you water. And you have, you can set it up for different irrigation schedules based on how frequently you want to water or how long you want to water. So let's say if you only want to water every other day, you're going to need to water that tree with 4 gallons of water every other day for 3 months. Okay. And then if you have a greater than 4-inch caliper, obviously it's going to take longer for that tree to get established. No question in the chat. Let's see. So question in the chat about watering bags. And I think that these can be useful in situations where, for instance, along roadways, right, where trees are planted and then nobody's going to be near that tree for a long period of time. It can be useful in that situation. I would caution, though, that when you're putting this, you put this essentially bag of water on top of the roots, you're going to have a lot of weight right there, right? When you initially put that bag of water on there, water is really heavy. So it's going to be a lot of weight that you're going to have right there. And you also could run into some issues with, temperature regulation. And then I would also be concerned with whether or not it's going to be removed when it's empty. Because if it is, if it has gotten to the point where most of the water is gone from it, from that water bag, and it's just kind of sitting there. Now what you have is you have a piece of plastic that's laying on top of your root ball, and it's preventing water from getting into the root ball. So I would say they're useful in certain situations, but just like all parts of tree maintenance, tree care, you need to make sure you have a plan for what you're going to do with it when it's done. Make sure that you get somebody out there to remove it, and make sure that you're checking to make sure that there's not any damage to the roots or anything like that. The question that I got, Susan, was that there are some watering bags. It's essentially like a big sock of plastic with some pores in it that allow the water to seep out over time. So they have like a certain rate at which the water is supposed to seep out of these bags, and they kind of water the tree for you. So that's one thing. They also have these, they actually call them tree diapers, and they have an absorbent compound inside basically this ring that you put around on top of the root ball, and it's essentially supposed to keep keep moisture on top of the root ball. Is basically the idea with these things. But I haven't seen really good research to indicate that they're better than just watering, or really that they do anything to speed up the establishment process. So this is a really good table. You can access this through a couple of EDIS documents, or you can take a picture of it with your camera right now and you can have it available to you. But this is a good rule of thumb for making sure that your tree is established based on the amount of water that you're putting out and the caliper when it goes in the ground. Okay. Keep losing my mouse. Yes, the question just came in the Q&A box, and yes. Again, this is based on the caliper size of the tree, not on the tree species. So yeah, they're going to follow a similar irrigation schedule for establishment. Now, I want to reiterate here the importance of mulching, and I really like to show this photo, and I wanted to make sure to put a note on this kind of mulching, right? Something that we talked about during the planting section of last week's webinar was that we don't want to cover the top of the root ball with mulch. You know, we don't want it to be completely covered. And this is because we want to encourage gas exchange, and we don't want that mulch to get compacted and be hydrophobic. So you really want to keep that mulch off surface roots. Ideally, you want your mulch to be, you know, 2 to 3 feet in diameter per inch caliper of tree. So, you know, you really want that mulch to go a pretty far distance away from the trunk. And the reason for that is because it's going to protect that young tree from having machinery like a mower or a weed whacker coming too close to the trunk and potentially causing damage to it. Now, mulch is really, really important during the establishment phase because it's going to help hold on to that soil moisture and make it less likely that your tree is going to dry out in the interims between watering. I do want to encourage you to check occasionally for mulch compaction or fusing. Occasionally what will happen is a fungal mycelium will start to grow in the mulch media, and it kind of packs it all together in this tight little layer right on top of the soil, and then it makes it really hard for water to infiltrate. So you need to go out there occasionally, make sure to loosen up that mulch so that you still are getting the benefits of mulching. Okay, yeah, Dave, bananas are different. So I have a question in here and I'll go ahead and just answer that live. Yeah, banana trees are different in that they really like a lot of high nutrient kind of components to the soil around them. And they, you know, it's pretty common for people to kind of, you know, like when one banana tree flowers and fruits, right, it's going to die. So they cut that one down and they just leave it there amongst their bananas to kind of feed the next banana that's coming along. And that's pretty common. Again, you know, bananas are unlike the kind of hardwood trees that we're talking about. It's going to have a completely different vascular system and root system. So you don't want to pile things up against the trunk still, because you're going to still have that issue where you get moisture held too close to the base of the tree, and then you could invite different kinds of pathogens into the tree. So that's something that I wouldn't encourage you to kind of pile things up right up against the trunk. But you know, if you want to, you know, spread your compost out around your bananas, they love that kind of stuff. Okay. So the next thing that I want to talk about for establishment is root management. And something that we talked a lot about in our last webinar was, focusing on, how do we make sure that our below ground components or characteristics are suitable for planting a tree. And some of those things that we have to consider are, where is my clay located in my soil? Do I have clay in my soil? Is my soil severely compacted due to development or, for some other reason? And making sure that the tree, when you put it in the ground, right, as well, is in a healthy state as far as its roots are concerned. So we talked about circling or girdling roots. And so you want to continue to watch for this as the tree is going through its establishment phase. Because if you have a situation where you've planted a tree and its roots aren't able to successfully kind of infiltrate the soil around it, you may end up with a situation where the roots start to circle around that root ball. And so you really want to watch your tree for this, remove those roots if possible. And there's good research that shows you, yes, if you cut the roots, the circling roots, there is going to be some stress to the tree, but they're going to recover most of the time. There are some trees that are more susceptible to stress related to root cutting. And unfortunately, one of my favorites is actually in that list, the gumbo limbo, magnolia, maple, I believe, is also in that list. So they are a little bit more susceptible to getting higher stress damage if you cut the roots, if you have to cut the roots. But in general, they're going to work just fine. But remember that if you don't address a circling or girdling root at this point, then you're going to end up with a tree that is unstable and potentially is going to result in restriction of the cambium, and that's going to disallow the transfer of nutrients and water up and down the trunk of the tree. If you do need to trim some of the circling roots, make sure that you're irrigating to ensure recovery. You don't want to stress the tree out by cutting the roots and then also stress the tree out by not giving it enough water. If you run into a situation where there's a large circling root and it has wrapped, 50% to 75% of the way around the trunk, and you're really concerned about that tree, one of the things you can do is you can kind of take like a penknife and you can kind of poke a little bit above where that root is and kind of determine whether or not there's any spongy or rotten material above where that root is circling around the trunk. If you do find some of that, then that means that it has effectively constricted off that section of the tree and it's not receiving water or nutrition. In this case, I would highly recommend that you reach out to an arborist to come out and evaluate that tree and determine whether or not they think it can be saved at that point. So again, watch your roots, check them for circling and girdling. It may be a situation too where you need to do a little bit of, check that drip line, check the outside of that root ball, make sure that there's not any issues, any kind of material like rocks or anything like that that you didn't notice before that are kind of constricting the growth of those tree roots. Okay, I'm just checking the chat box here. Okay, awesome. Continue on. So what I want to talk about next is in this establishment phase, right? You planted your tree. Ideally, you've done this already. But if you haven't done this already, now is a good time to do it. You're planning for what this tree's life is going to look like. You're planning for how you're going to take care of this tree. So you really want to actively plan for the long-term maintenance of your tree. In particular, if you are in a position of responsibility within your community and you want to see the tree or trees that you have planted in your community survive over the course of their life. I highly recommend that you develop a community tree care plan if you don't already have one. And in neighborhoods where there are HOAs or even condo associations, you should have within your landscape rules, something that talks about how you're going to take care of the trees in your community. And one of the reasons why this is so important is that these boards and these associations, they turn over very frequently. And so you could have a board that decided to put in 15 really nice trees 5 years ago. There's a whole new board now, and they say, hey, we don't like these trees, we want to put palms in here. And if you don't have anything in your rules or set up in your community tree care plan to protect those trees that are there, then you could constantly be having this issue where you're spending money where you don't need to spend money, you're removing trees that were intended to provide some kind of community benefit. So it's a really good way to also kind of set in stone or set on paper the importance of having a community canopy. So recognizing the innumerable benefits that trees provide to us, both in environmental benefits, things like temperature regulation, stormwater filtration, oxygen production, carbon sequestration, right? We have all of these benefits, but also thinking about community health benefits to humans. So things like air quality improvement, asthma reduction, stress reduction, improved heart health. These are all things that are associated with a healthy urban canopy or community canopy. So really thinking about, setting somewhere on paper, it's important that we have trees in our neighborhood. Here's what we're going to do to take care of the trees we have. Here's our plan for wanting to plant more trees. Really getting that information down is a really, really good idea. What should a community tree care plan contain? Well, ideally you would have maybe a list of trees that are suitable to your location. Maybe you've gone out and you've done some pH testing. You've looked at the trees that tend to survive well in our area. You've thought about things like sunlight and wind and salt. And so you have kind of a recommended list of trees. That would be a great place to start. And then you talk about, okay, these are the areas where we feel we need more trees. Here is how we're going to take care of the trees that we have. We're going to develop a yearly pruning schedule for the mature trees that we have. Those types of things should all be a component of your community tree care plan. And then think about how you're going to pay for it too. Make sure that you have funding considerations in there as well. Who should write this plan? It should be a group effort on behalf of whatever community association you're working with. And you can also reach out to us at the Extension office to help you get that kind of facilitated and working. We can provide you with kind of the bones, the recommendations for what tree species might do well. We can talk to you about how to hire an arborist, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But really it shouldn't come from us or from someone else. It should really be a community effort. So who should write it? Your community should write it. And then who's going to enforce these rules? Well, every community has different methods for how they kind of hold people accountable. And so I think that it would be up to the organization of your community and how kind of things like that are dealt with. So again, this wouldn't be something where you would like call the county and say, this person's cutting down the tree. Well, the county's not the one who wrote the community tree care plan, right? But one of the nice things about having it is that 15 years down the line, you can point back to this plan and say, hey, we never, got started on planting these trees in this open space over here. We've got a little bit of money in the landscape budget from our HOA fees. Let's go ahead and focus on that this year. It gives you an opportunity to kind of fall back on that tree care plan and use it as a way to improve the trees in your community. So an important component of long-term maintenance for your trees is finding good help, right? Because you're not going to be out there pruning the trees all the time. You're not going to be the one who is bracing them if they have some kind of catastrophic branch failure. So there are some good recommendations for what you should look for when you're hiring an arborist. And I say hire an arborist, not a tree service, because you want to find someone who is certified by ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, as an arborist. And things that you should avoid when you are looking for an arborist are any arborists who advertise tree topping. You don't want tree topping is generally not recommended unless it's a specific purpose for something like a fruit tree that has gotten too large. You want to avoid an arborist who's going to suggest removal of a living tree. In general, an arborist should be telling you how to keep that tree alive, and not recommending that you remove a living tree. You also want to avoid just picking the one that's the cheapest. You know, I know that that can be a really enticing factor to look at first, but ideally, when you are looking for an arborist, you should really find one who's going to do the appropriate types of pruning to maintain the health of your trees over their life. Look for local references, ask them for local references. Say, hey, can you, point me to another community where you've taken care of the trees? Make sure that their ISA certification is up to date. Ask them if they have any additional certifications. Do they have a, for instance, are they professional mangrove trimmers? There are some counties that have received delegation of the state mangrove trimming rule, and arborists, a lot of arborists will go through that additional professional mangrove trimmer training. Do they have a track specialization, which is a tree risk assessment qualification? Not every arborist has the specific training to tell you whether a tree is at risk of failure or damaging your property. Those that have that additional track specification are going to have more training on tree risk assessment, and they're going to be better able to make that kind of determination. Do they have up-to-date insurance? What is their insurance? And do they operate, can they acquire a permit for tree removal or tree trimming if they need to? Ask them about ANSI A300 pruning standards. This is kind of the world recognized standard for pruning practices. You don't need to know all the details, but you want them to be able to, kind of throw the book at you on ANSI A300. And then ask them about the ANSI Z133 safety standards as well, to make sure that they're going to take care of themselves and the folks that work for them. And then if there are any state or municipality specific requirements. Ask them if they know of any, or you find out if you have a specific state rule or municipality rule. Some things to consider here would be if you have a neighborhood with conservation areas or conservation easements, make sure that your arborist knows whether or not they're allowed to cut trees in that area, and if so, if they need to, who they need to contact in order to do so. And do make sure that you have more than one arborist look at the job before you decide on who you're going to hire. All right, so these are some recommendations for hiring an arborist. I do suggest that you do so. Just having a general landscape company also prune your trees is not going to be the best recommendation. You really want somebody who has been trained specifically in how to care for trees over the course of their life. Okay, now we're gonna answer some questions. Don't worry, it's not as long as last week. There's only 4 questions in our first poll. I'm gonna go ahead and launch the poll. You should have some questions in front of you. You can answer those questions. There are only 4. I'll give us a couple minutes to do so. Nobody's voted yet. Can everybody see the questions? Type in the chat box if you cannot see the questions. Oh, we got 2 people. Okay. You guys can see them. You were just taking your time. Oh, okay. So on the question number 4, it's not letting you choose more than one. I apologize on that one. Choose the best one for number 4 then. Okay, 67% of you have voted. I'll give it about until 3 minutes have passed, and then we'll go ahead and move on. All right, we're going to go ahead and end it there. 3 minutes have passed. Okay, so I'm going to share the results so that you can all see. 2 inches or 2 gallons per inch of caliper, remember? So that's your general rule of thumb for each watering event. No, you don't need to reapply frequently on top of the root ball, right? If you did apply your mulch, reapply your mulch frequently, you wouldn't want to do it right on top of the root ball because it would end up piling up and being a problem for those roots. Why should you monitor your tree for circling roots? They can become girdling roots if they're not addressed. They can lead to instability, and they can be addressed before they become girdling roots. They will not always kill the tree. And then, yes, you want to make sure that your arborist has current certifications, that they have reliable references, and remember that you don't want them to immediately say, hey, I need to take that tree down. Because ideally they're going to work with you on how to keep that living tree in the ground and not remove a living tree. Okay. All right. Well, now we're going to talk about a few kind of things to watch out for, some common abnormalities or normal abnormalities that you may think are a problem that are not actually a problem. And then we will move on from there. Let's see. If it's an invasive tree, then sure, yes. Good point, Dorinda. If you have a tree on your property like a carrot wood or a Brazilian pepper or an Australian pine, and that arborist says, hey, I'll give you a really good discount on taking out this invasive tree, then that's a good arborist. So what are some common problems to watch out for? Does anybody know what this guy is? If you want to type it in the chat if you do know. This guy causes a lot of, yeah, good. Anybody else? Good. Okay. So this is a Sri Lankan weevil, and they do a lot of chewing damage to leaves. They don't commonly really hurt the plant though, but they do cause a lot of aesthetic damage. And so, you know, we get questions about these quite frequently. And And, you know, it really is up to that. What is your level of aesthetic standard? And that's something we're going to talk about as far as pests are concerned. You know, so some common problems to recognize, insects are one of them, but when are they really a problem, right? Insects become a problem if they are vectors of a disease, or if they are causing so much defoliation that it is interrupting the metabolic processes of the plant. So, you know, the picture here is of a pine bark borer. You know, there are some boring beetles that can get into the trees, and they actually harvest fungus, and then that fungus ends up killing the tree. So recognizing, you know, when something is just kind of causing a bit of chewing damage versus when it could be a significant problem, it can be hard for the layperson. So I would recommend that if you find some insects on a tree and you're worried they might be a problem, take a picture of them and send them to us here at the county extension office, or, you know, catch some of the little critters and bring them into the plant clinic, and we'll be happy to talk to you about whether or not those insects are actually a problem. Please take the time to identify the insect and determine whether or not it's going to be a problem before you apply any kind of insecticides. Insecticides are generally not target specific enough that you're not going to have some damage to potentially beneficial insects. So really take the time to figure out what the insect is that you're dealing with before you go out there and apply some kind of insecticide. You know, especially something like the Sri Lankan weevil, they're really, really hard to get rid of with an insecticide. You know, one of the best things to do is just go out to the tree and shake it really good and catch them all in like a sheet and then dump them into a bucket of soapy water. So recognizing what the insect is going to be the first kind of best tool in your toolbox for dealing with a pest problem. With diseases, what are the symptoms of the disease? How do you know it's a disease and not something else? There are some particular trees that are susceptible to different kinds of diseases. So, you know, think about things like laurel wilt. Think about our palm trees that are susceptible to things like lethal yellowing, lethal bronzing, Ganoderma butt rot. You know, these are diseases that we can pretty quickly tell whether or not your tree is suffering from that disease. And again, take a photo, you know, cut a leaf, bring it in to your extension office, your local extension office, and they can talk to you about whether or not it's a disease. Some diseases look a lot like nutritional problems or underwatering or overwatering. So make sure that you're really dealing with a disease before you kind of go to the drastic measure of cutting down the tree or removing the tree from the landscape. And beware too of folks that might want to try to sell you kind of long-term, you know, prophylactic treatments for your trees. This is in particular related to something like lethal bronzing. Make sure that if somebody is recommending to do like antibiotic injections into your tree, you know, make sure that they have done their due diligence, and also think about the long-term cost associated with those kind of long-term care plans related to the kind of value of that tree in the landscape. Over and underwatering are very, very common, right? If you follow the general recommended irrigation guidelines for establishment, you should be okay. If your tree, you know, starts to have wilted leaves pretty soon after, you know, let's say you're a month into having the tree in the ground and the leaves are starting to look really wilted, that could be underwatering. It could also be overwatering. So check your irrigation, make sure that if you are irrigating, you're doing it enough or you're not doing it too much, okay? Check your tree periodically during this establishment phase to make sure that it hasn't settled into the planting hole and ended up where the soil is resting against the trunk. Remember that you want to see that root flare. You want to see that place where the trunk meets that topmost root and starts to flare out. Okay, if you can't see the trunk flare, you need to remove some of that soil from around the base of the trunk to make sure that you're not going to get any issues related to having that tree planted too deeply. Okay. Let's see. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there was a question about mulch, keeping it away from the base of the tree or plants in general, and that is, yep, that is our general recommendation. So this is something that you might see, yellowing or chlorosis of the leaves. This is something that can be caused by overwatering, underwatering, or a nutritional deficiency. And usually your nutritional deficiency might be related to the fact that you're overwatering, because if you're overwatering your soil, you're going to be flushing all of that nutrition out of the soil and making it more difficult for the tree to catch it and to use it. I have also seen in some areas where pine trees, which are adapted to living in very nutrient poor environments, very sandy, nutrient poor environments, where pine trees will get chlorosis on the needles, they'll start to yellow. And this is because they're being irrigated with reclaimed water. And so the reclaimed water actually has a pretty high nutrient content. And so some of those pine trees actually really don't like that high nutrient content in that reclaimed water. So that might be something to be aware of, depending on the type of irrigation water you're using. Understanding what's normal for a plant and what's not normal for a plant is going to help you avoid a stressful situation where you go outside and you know, oh no, my tree, what's going wrong with my tree? So how do we know what is normal and what's a problem? Well, one of those things is or one of the ways that you can know is when you are selecting your tree at the very beginning, right? If we go back to our first class last week, we talked about tree selection. You're going to choose a tree that has specific characteristics and you're going to know what those characteristics are. But let's say that you're coming into a situation where you're new to the neighborhood. You know, there are some trees that were planted fairly recently, but let's say you've only lived in Florida for 2 years or a year or 6 months, and you've never seen this tree before. Well, that's where we can help you take a picture of it again, send it to us here at the extension office, and we can help you figure out whether that's normal or abnormal. So some things that are normal for palms that we get a lot of questions on really frequently are things like scurf, which is kind of a fuzzy coating on the base of the leaf, and you'll find it on a lot of palms. This one in particular is on a Bismarck palm. It can be kind of a brown fuzzy or it can be kind of silvery as well, but it'll usually be kind of tan or brown or silver colored on the base of the leaf. So scurf is normal. Adventitious roots and this root initiation zone here. So you can see that the base of this palm tree, they have these roots that start to drop down. And this will be really prevalent on things like, oh gosh, what has really good adventitious roots that you might see in the landscape? I'll come back to it. I'll think about it. But palm trees have them, and this is what they look like. This is not a problem. You know, don't worry that your palm tree is dying here. This is a normal thing for you to see. Some palm trees will naturally shed their boots. This part of the palm tree is called the boot. This is where the leaf was attached to the palm when it was younger. So sometimes they shed them naturally, and sometimes they don't, and they hang on to the tree. And you may have one cabbage palm that sheds its boots, and the cabbage palm right next to it holds on to them. So understanding that those are supposed to be there, that there's nothing wrong with them, and to be careful if you want to have a clean trunk, you know, as the tree gets taller, you can pull those boots off, but you want to make sure that you're not causing any damage to the tree when you're doing so, because remember, palms are not like other types of trees. They're not trees really. They don't have a cambium. They don't heal from wounds. They don't compartmentalize wounds. So if you injure a palm tree, the injury stays open and it can invite pests and things like that. And then you may also have this kind of splitting at the base in the root initiation zone. And this is also normal. It's not something to be concerned about. Let's see 2 things in the chat. Yep. Yeah, Phoenix palms have adventitious roots. Okay, good. All right, so these are all things that we get questions about pretty frequently here at the Extension Office. Another thing that we get questioned about a lot is lichen and epiphytes. I had an email just the other day from someone who was really concerned. All of the oak trees in my neighborhood are covered in this stuff and I don't know what it is and I want to make sure they're not killing my oak trees. And the stuff he was talking about was lichen, which is in the upper right hand circle right here. Lichen is really cool, but it is harmless. It can come in this nice light green kind of turquoise color. It can also be bright pink, but you'll find it on all kinds of different species of trees. You'll find them on palm trees, and lichen is totally harmless. You'll also have Spanish moss. You'll also have ball moss, and you may have air plants or tillandsias. These are actually all tillandsias here. Spanish moss is a tillandsia. And these are all harmless as well. And there's a lot of there's a lot of misconception about Spanish moss, and, it's opportunistic. So if there is space for it to grow, it's going to grow, but it doesn't harm the tree. It's not a parasite. If you don't like it because of the way it looks, sure, you can take it down. But otherwise it's not going to be a problem for your tree. Peeling bark is something else that we normally get questions about. And here on the left is a crepe myrtle. That is normal peeling bark. One of my favorite trees of all time, rainbow eucalyptus, has peeling bark. It's totally normal. It's supposed to look like that. The tree on the right, this is abnormal bark shedding. And so you can actually, if you poke this tree, it's going to be kind of spongy because this tree is rotten and it is dying. And so this is abnormal bark shedding versus normal bark shedding or bark peeling. And again, if you don't know whether your tree is supposed to look like this or not, take a picture of it, send it to us, and we will help you figure that out. All right, one more time for questions that I'm going to ask of you, and then you can ask me some questions. All right, here we go. I'll give you about 3 minutes again to go ahead and answer. We only got 71% of people voting last time or answering the questions last time. So let's see if we can up that percentage a little bit this time. I think you can beat it. I think we can get 78%. All right, we're at 66% now. I think we can get 78. I think we can do it. We're only at 1:25, so you guys are beating your time from last time around. Whoever just typed into the Q&A, I only got a part of your question. If you want to try to type it in again, it looks like it cut off there halfway through your sentence. Ooh, we're so close, 74%. All right, we got about 30 seconds left. We just need one more person. Okay, well, we beat last time around, but we didn't get 78%. We only got 76% of you guys voted. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and share the results with you so you can see. What 3 problems present similar symptoms in a tree? Yes, too much water, too little water, and nutrient deficiency. They can all look very similar. Lichen is an indication of tree decline, true or false? That is false. Knowing the characteristics of your tree will prevent uncertainty about its health. True, right? We need to know what our trees are. Which of the following is normal for a palm tree? Fuzzy scurf present on leaves. Absolutely. Good job, everyone. And we had a question come into the chat. And so I'm going to go ahead and we're at that point now where I'm going to go ahead and answer these questions and put some things in the chat box for you. Good, we're at 12:55. So how can we tell how much water we're putting on a tree when we water with a hose? I recommend to everybody to go ahead and just take a bucket and see how long it takes you to fill up that bucket. So if you have a 1 gallon bucket or a 5 gallon bucket, right? Time, how long it takes to fill up that bucket, and then just run your hose for that amount of time, okay? And yes, some trees may be a little more water hungry than others. In particular, fruit trees, especially when they're are gonna want a little water. But, you know, again, knowing your tree, knowing the requirements of that tree, you know, you're not going to plant a pond apple in the middle of your kind of normal landscape, right? You're not going to plant a tree that is specific to a wetland environment where you don't have a typically wet spot in your yard. This goes back to right tree, right place. For a drip hose or drip irrigation, you also can do a calibration where you run it for a certain amount of time with some way to catch the water underneath it, see how long it takes to fill up that vessel, you know, measure how much water is in there, and then you'll know for about how long you need to run your drip irrigation. So a question on mature oak trees from David. I would say, David, to find out for sure if they're live oaks, first of all, and not, you know, let's say a laurel or a white or some kind of a hybrid, because oaks hybridize very frequently, you know, and they're established, they don't have any irrigation, but they look a little sad. How do they look? Send us a photo, maybe we can help you out. If they're having like some tip decline where you are losing leaves from the ends of the branches, or they're chlorotic or something like that, there may be something going on in your soil. You know, so again, send us a photo and we can help you out. Let's see here. Okay. Hired a tree doctor. I hope it was an arborist, not just somebody who called themselves tree doctor. Let's see. Okay, so the question is about Spanish moss, and again, asking, you know, if you don't remove it, can it be a problem for the tree over the life of the tree? Generally, you know, Spanish moss is not going to inundate an entire tree. And it has not been shown through any research that having Spanish moss on a tree leads to tree decline. There is some correlation between a tree that is already in decline or a very mature tree that is not actively growing very rapidly anymore, and presence of Spanish moss. So if you have a tree, let's say you have a 60-year-old oak tree, right? It's not actively growing as kind of exuberantly as it did when it was a younger tree, right? And so, you know, that tree may have more Spanish moss on it, but the Spanish moss isn't the reason why that tree has slowed down its growth. If you see what I'm saying here, there's a correlation between the two things, but there's no research to indicate that Spanish moss does any harm to a tree. Okay, and let me go ahead. I'm going to stop my share now so that I can grab a couple of links for you all to get into the chat box before you go, and then I will let you head on your way for the rest of today. So next week, we're going to be talking about pruning specifically, and I will put the link to register in the chat box for you. So the link that I just put in the chat box is the link to register for next week's webinar, which is the same day, same time, Friday at noon. And we're going to be talking specifically about pruning. The next link that I am going to put in the chat box is our County Extension's YouTube channel, which is where you can find some of our other presentations that we've done. And I will have all of these webinars packaged in a series and posted as a playlist on YouTube as soon as we are done. And I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that I promised you. Let me go ahead and add this as well. There's some really good information here on this IFAS website that you would probably find useful. Please follow the links. They go to all kinds of good things. So there are some resources for you to use. And with that, we are at 1:02. Here, let me do one thing really quick. Okay. Let me go ahead and, yep, I see what I did here. Hang on one second. Okay, you should be able to see them all now. Oh, there we go. There you go. Can everybody see those now? Somebody give me a, okay, good, excellent. Perfect. All right. Well, I will see you all next week for the next installment, the final class. We're going to talk about pruning specifically, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.